Thank you so much for being here. Really terrific. That was a lot, wasn't it?
It
was a lot of information.
It was a lot of information.
It was a lot of information. You're all still awake, mostly. Thank you. Mindy, I thought I would begin with you. You have a fantastic blog called Countdown to Main Street, where you recount your travels to main streets across the Northeast and wherever your travels take you. In reading your blog, you've visited many areas of New York City, including Brownsville, Brooklyn, which will be discussed in more detail tomorrow through the lens of public housing. So tell us through your travels what you see as the biggest threats to livability in New York City's neighborhood. How do they compare with other cities? Your observations about all of this.
I think the big problem that we see in the data is that not everybody's having the same experience. So as Constantia said last year, if you're a rich white person living in Manhattan, you're having a lot of fun, and maybe if you're somebody else living someplace else, you're not having as much fun. And we know that in the United States as a whole, the divergence in income is getting to be just unbelievable, verging on obscene, and that's reflected in the city. So according to Sam Roberts writing in the New York Times, there's a surge of blacks, Asians, and Hispanics moving to the suburbs, so moving out of New York City, and increase in concentration, particularly in Manhattan, of whites. Rents are astronomical, so the poor are also getting pushed out. So we're creating, certainly in Manhattan, an alabaster tower that will not be accessible. And this disparity, this inequality, this driving out of the poor, first of all, is destabilizing, and second of all, creates tensions and hatreds and destabilizes the whole city. It threatens the integrity of the urban fabric. Everybody doesn't have to be rich, and there's plenty of poor people that I've interviewed all over the world who had a fabulous time living in a city. As Tony Goldman said, it's the quality of the street life. We can make streets and parks and playgrounds where everybody is having fun, not because they're rich, but because we have a great thing going on in this city. But but it seems to tip. If you take too much of the money and too much of the opportunity away, and you trap people, then you create just real division, and that is spectacularly bad. So that's the danger. All cities copy New York. New York did planned shrinkage in the 70s. Now Youngstown wants to do planned shrinkage. So if New York becomes an alabaster tower, the other cities will try to follow. So I'm a psychiatrist. This is deeply troubling to me as a physician, and I hope that MAS will say something about this.
We see this, this polarization. We saw it last year. It's almost like surveying entirely different places, different cities, where one segment of the city has these wildly favorable responses to these factors of livability. As you said, they're having kind of a great time, and then other areas of the city are having a very, very different experience. When we looked at the arts and culture question, which was an interesting drill down for us to kind of specifically hone in on that, because you do kind of get seduced into this bubble where you think, well, look, this is New York City. We have the most, and it is true, we have the most extraordinary arts and cultural landscape of any city in the country, and certainly one of the greatest in the world. And so doesn't everybody get that? Doesn't everyone appreciate it? And aren't more people able to experience it? But yet, in asking that question, what we all heard in these results was that accessibility to, availability of, a sense of being connected to these arts and cultural resources is not commonly felt around the city in the same way. And then again, it becomes a kind of a Manhattan wins scenario. Constantia, you've spent a lot of time in the arts and culture space, and I'm sure that these results got you to think a little bit more about this kind of inequity and what it might suggest about some of the other inequities that we're talking about.
I think it suggests a few things. I think it suggests we need to dig deeper. Eddie Torres and I had a 2-second little tete-a-tete about that disparity among boroughs and what they think about culture. I'm like, surely people know about Pregones and about the Bronx Museum and about Snug Harbor and about every place in Brooklyn. And so I wonder sometimes, is it accessibility? Is it transportation? Is it, as with the engagement issue, is it time? Is it also a sense of welcome? Because I know, for instance, in the work that we did with our pals like Randy Borchardt and Norma Munn and Ted Berger with the Cultural Blueprint, we found in a Fordham study that we subcontracted that older people and children often felt less connection to cultural resources, partly because of accessibility, transportation, choice. You know, a kid doesn't get to choose where they go all the time. An older person may feel less safe or less able to go on the fabulous public transportation. But something's happening, and I think Majority Carter talked a lot about opportunity, and I think this is an opportunity to dig deeper into those numbers, because is it that people do not know of some of the extraordinary resources in every single borough? Is it that they're not going? You know, what is it? So these kinds of issues can be very nuanced and complicated. For instance, when you look at the issues of in-migration and out-migration, particularly of people of color, and you look at things that say that one of the major outflows of black people in this country is from Brooklyn. Yet, New York also has one of the largest African American populations of any major city, not just metro areas. So every time you see a statistic, what else is under that? So here's the problem. What is the opportunity? And so I have to say I was dismayed, quite frankly, to see those numbers and surprised. And I would love to see, when you cross-cut them and get under them deeply, what happens. And one other comment I do want to, for two things I want to say. First of all, I stole that comment from Mary last year about the summary of, if you're a white guy making $75K, you're happy. I stole that directly from her.
She did.
I did. And now she's on the panel, so I've got to admit it. If she wasn't on the panel, no way. But to what Mindy said, the great philosopher, Fran Lebowitz, who I'd like to actually be, in her wonderful documentary Public Speaking, talks about New York and its predilection towards the rich these days, and about who wants to live in a city with just rich people. We want their money. We want them to give it to Majar and to Mindy and to Mary and to me, but we don't want the city to be that undiverse. So is the access an issue of economics? Is it transportation? Is it information? What is that? And I think that's the opportunity that we need to unpack further.
So can I jump in, since she stole my line from last year?
Yes.
So I think one of the things, when we were reviewing results ourselves, one of the things that we try to remind ourselves is that people tend to think of culture as something you consume or buy. You can see even the way the question's phrased, cinemas and theaters, that you purchase it. But culture is something we all make. And culture is being remade and made in all parts of the city all the time. And I think that's what Kinshasa's getting at here, is that, how do we help ourselves look around us to recognize that the cultural amenities that Tony Goldman was hinting at it, that it's up to us to make it. And all parts of this city create culture. We fabricate culture all the time.
Right.
And so we need to think about how we can get better at affirming the culture that's around us. And I think one of the challenges we have as a Manhattan-based organization is we're thinking hard about how do we create some better connective tissue so that the Bronx is coming to Brooklyn, Brooklyn's coming to Staten Island, Manhattan's going, and that we're in Queens, and that we're all sharing more in a more horizontal, lateral way and experiencing culture collectively, which makes the city the city.
That's right.
Okay, let's go up to the meta level on this. I know we've had individual conversations about this in different ways, but we are a nation that has incentivized sprawl development. We've put our tax money to building roads to move people further and further away from cities, further and further away from each other. When you look at the plight of cities today, not just first-tier cities, some first-tier cities, but let's say second-tier cities and industrial cities in the Northeast. Even during boom cycles, their incapacity to boom where the sort of the destruction of these places kind of seems to continue. But yet, there are so many great areas of New York and of other cities where there's still a tremendous built environment fabric that's there, but there's no will, there's no incentive. There don't seem to be the policies in place at the federal level, among states and in municipalities themselves to really get at this kind of revitalization. So what do we do about this? I mean, every year, the rate we're going, it seems, we could be back up here, looking at the same survey results, right? Year after year after year after year for an eternity. Am I onto something here? I mean, is there a profound lacking at the federal level with respect to leadership on cities? Are the ties between the feds, states, and municipal leaders strengthening or worsening to help develop those strategies and finance them?
I think that as someone who now lives in Washington, D.C., and as Kate Levin said when she first got the job as commissioner, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I'm from the quasi-government and I'm skeptical, but love that federal funding. But I think when it comes to policy, it really takes people like these ladies, like the people in the audience, the people you're going to hear speaking later, folks like my pals from Harlem, like Rosa Rivers, who's in the audience, to leverage those policies. Because on the one hand, I can understand Tony Goldman's skepticism and impatience with policy makers in the government, but I'm really more in the Carter corner on this. This is your government, whether it's federal, state, city, and these are your resources, and leveraging them is key. And sometimes you've really got to be that squeaky wheel, and partnership is absolutely one thing, but also sometimes, we're not allowed to do that at the Smithsonian, so I would never protest anything. But the rest of you should raise your hands and should speak to the folks, because why shouldn't money go into the redevelopment of New Orleans, one of the most important cities in the world? Why shouldn't it go into communities that have been devastated by urban renewal? And so I think that's part of the policy that people need to advocate. And one other part of that is, I think on the margins, those intermediary organizations, those nonprofits and communities in this city and around the country are what are key. And a cautionary tale, if we have later, I'll talk about, is Washington, D.C. I came back to a city that I lived in many years ago to see it, I think, at the municipal level in much worse shape. It is more segregated, it is more stratified, the poor are poorer, the metrics on health are worse. It is like what the press would call a so-called third world country, and that is ridiculous in the 21st century in the richest country in the world.
Mm-hmm. I do research at New York State Psychiatric Institute, and so I've been looking a lot at policies. So a lot of these policies come from the federal government, some are state and local. And it seems to me that there were a stream of policies, a remarkable stream of policies in the second half of the 20th century that were profoundly anti-urban. Certainly highways, but also urban renewal was devastating policy, which Jane Jacobs did so much to help raise our consciousness about it. But that wasn't the end. Then we had planned shrinkage, which now Youngstown wants to do. Gentrification and Hope 6 have also been, I think, ill-considered. All of these policies that have led to the foreclosure crisis are pounding cities all across the nation. I read a study yesterday, a paper from Detroit, looking at young black women who had just had babies, and 1 in 8 had experienced foreclosure. And these were these were women who had enough money to buy a home, and 1 in 8 had experienced foreclosure. So these are what a series of policies coming from our leaders. How are our cities supposed to prosper if we keep coming up with these bad ideas? So I think that part of what we have to do in being responsible and being engaged with our government is to argue for good policies. And this has been a heated debate, But it's got to be even more vigorously pursued, that our cities are collapsing because we keep hitting them with very bad policies. So this issue of engagement is so fundamental. Only 33% of New Yorkers went to a community board meeting. Where I live in the Oranges in New Jersey, we have developed a Free People's University called the University of Orange. And in order to graduate, we graduate every year, one of the things you have to do is go to a city meeting. I think it's really important for us as citizens to go to our city meeting. But we have to acknowledge that these are terrible policies. And that's why our cities are floundering. Terrible policies.
So I think one of the reasons why we need to be a bit fearful about looking to government to somehow give us good policies, because some of the best intentioned policies have had dreadful consequences. So I like to think of us, I mean, we're city people. We're about what happens at the most community level. And it seems to me that we want government to lead mostly as enabling us to find our own way. And I think you heard Goldman and Carter saying that. Let's put it in the hands of the community. So, my advocacy would always be for how do you empower local communities more? How do you get the decision-making more in the hands of folks that are on the ground and know what the conditions are? And as you're suggesting, leverage the resources.
Yes.
But I don't think we want big brother or big sister coming in and giving us one-size-fits-all solutions. That's the Hope 6 initiative, the things you're talking about, have in fact devastated some cities. We need stuff that's made, that's particular, that reflects the local condition. And we need government to come in and support us to make those kinds of things happen.
I want to probe a little bit more on engagement and then on optimism. We saw some, and Mindy, as you just underscored, we saw some interesting results on engagement and New Yorkers' kind of appetite for engaging in the public process. But what do we think of this whole movement, phenomenon of democratization, of social media, of the way in which people are connecting today? There are generational considerations in that, because younger generations or younger people are just more comfortable with connecting up in substantive ways through digital connections. We can see whether it's the Arab Spring, or we can see whether it's what's happening on Wall Street, that groups can connect over an issue, get together, start to create an action. What kind of an impact do you think this is going to have? I mean, when we look at public engagement today through these kinds of research questions, we generally look at traditional ways in which individuals may engage, like going to a community board meeting. But increasingly, there are all these, let's call them non-traditional ways of engagement that seem to be, certainly are going to grow exponentially and are potentially very powerful and catalytic.
What is sustainable is one of my questions. What has an impact? So I love watching my nieces and nephews and my godchildren and their engagement. I love that the ones in universities now have courses that require actually social engagement, and actually that's in some high schools as well. And to get credit for being engaged in your community is important. But what is sustainable? I thought a very fascinating part of the study is that while some of the other metrics on the Bronx showed dissatisfaction and with certain services and other things, that engagement was very high. Again, a real important opportunity for further study is if engagement is high in a place where people feel that everything from police protection to other things isn't where it needs to be. But when you look at the issue of immigration, when you look at the issue of race, I think you see enormous opportunities mixed in with the challenges of segregation and stratification. And I think a lot of them concentrate around young people in terms of those folks who did not grow up with some of the prejudices that we older people did. The possibility for communication in other ways that are more rapid and real time, but also I think we old people need to help them too with making the depth of that communication, the sustainability of that engagement, something that then leads to change and to letting them be real actors in their lives and not just kind of interactors and part-time, short-term participants.
That was kind of encouraging, wasn't it, that the number of Bronx respondents suggesting that they could have a big impact on their neighborhoods. Mindy, did you have an observation about that? I mean, that was definitely an interesting finding,
I've spent a lot of
given
time
the other Bronx data.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the Bronx over the years, and I think that Majority Carter comes out of a lot of local engagement. The Bronx was devastated by planned shrinkage, but people really rallied to try to save their homes. If you think of one of the things that we measure in terms of community cohesion is, would you get together with your neighbors if the fire station was going to be closed in your neighborhood? And so Bronx neighbors have certainly done that. They've stood vigil in front of their fire station for months on end to make sure that their fire stations were reopened. So I think the Bronx has really is coming back from the ashes as a result of the will of the local people.
Yeah, I think
Traditions of activism.
I think the world kind of divides between people that have a controlling instinct, and we could do a show of hands how many of you are controllers and how many of you are not so. But you can see it manifesting, I think, when you see the changes now in government. It's up to institutions to let go more, let that data out, and now users are becoming engaged with that. I was a bit, I'm old enough to remember before the iPhone, and when people were first getting iPhones, they were getting an iPhone, I'm buying an iPhone. Now it's I'm using an iPhone. And all these apps, people take the data, the controllers let the data out, and then all the folks that are generative in the community take that and they create an app overnight. You can't stop the vibrancy of a city. That's what I think is going to be interesting. The technology is democratizing it for us.
And the fact, there's an interesting notion about kids of color, while there's been a digital divide on big computers and all that, when it comes to smartphones and mobile devices, that just kind of melts away. And so I think that's really encouraging.
And in the global south, they've
That's
jumped
right.
landlines.
That's right.
They've all got the
And one more word on the Bronx. We have to remember this is the borough that gave us hip hop. So
Absolutely.
that's one of the most
Absolutely.
important cultural phenomenons internationally.
Absolutely.
Amen.
So heads up for the Bronx. Hip, hip, hooray.
Love hip hop. Optimism. Okay, New Yorkers are so optimistic. What is this about? I mean, given the mood of the nation, the concerns about the direction of the country, about the economy, about what does America mean in a global sense in these times. New Yorkers tend to survey, pretty happy, pretty optimistic about the future. Is that, we've debated this a lot internally in MAS. Is this just, our pride showing through that we're here? So of course we're happy, because where else would you want to be? I mean, what's the alternative? Where does this optimism thing, where do you think that it's coming from? And not just in Queens, but pretty much across the board. We saw very high numbers on optimism this year, happiness on last year, in spite of these other issues that respondents are giving their impressions on, which would suggest that maybe, the picture isn't quite so optimistic.
It's not money or fame or any of those things that makes us happy or feel secure, social scientists say. It's this thing about, do you have confidence in your neighbors, this collective efficacy? And what city produced Occupy Wall Street?
Exactly.
So I think that this idea that, okay, here's this national crisis, let's go occupy Wall Street, and people, New Yorkers, did. Breaking a kind of paralysis about this long recession and what are we going to do, giving voice to national angst. The deep culture of New York City is as a culture maker for the nation. And so to be able to give voice to this pain that we're all in by occupying Wall Street, this is what makes people love New York. And this is what we must not lose.
Do you think there is a correlation between density and optimism?
Absolutely.
There is, and one of the things that's troubling, also reported by Sam Roberts, is that in Manhattan, because now it's so profitable, is that 4 in 10 apartments in Manhattan are owned by part-time New Yorkers. So this whole problem of the commercialization of New York City, it's something to sell as opposed to as a place to live, and to solve problems together and to just be in the soup together. If MAS can keep promoting that, we would be in great shape.
You know, I'm a polite Canadian, so I'm a newcomer thank you, I'm a newcomer to New York, but what I can tell you that I'm always struck by is what a strong sense of entitlement New Yorkers have to their city. That's what I think the optimism is. You're all so committed to the place. No matter where you come from, it's your city, God darn it. And that's what I read the optimism being. Kinshasa, what do you?
I think that also, to a great extent, despite its issues otherwise, New York is a meritocracy in a way that, say, a place like Washington is not at all. Yeah. Some people merit what they get, but not many of them. But New York is a true meritocracy, which is why I got to throw in the Fiscal Policy Institute and the number of immigrant-owned businesses, the largest number in any major city. A huge part of small businesses are owned by New Yorkers who are foreign-born. The sense that it's not true that you can always make it, but there is something about that old song that Old Blue Eyes sings, that that meritocracy, that drive, the energy, it is literally up from the streets. Come to Washington if you want to really slow down. But if you want to walk proud and
Can't get non-fat yogurt after 7 o'clock in Washington.
You can't get very much. You have to come to New York to
You
get
have
it.
to, you have to take the Acela to New York or the Metro.
Yeah, but it's very green in D.C., and that's great. And my museum's going to be there, so hey, what's wrong with a place like that?
Well, like
Gotta go back.
Kinshasa, because we have a little inside vibe on this, because I've done 2 tours in Washington, 15 years apart. And the last tour ending in 2008. And I agree with your opening observations about the city. One of the things that, and I mean, we don't see this just in Washington, but something that I was struck by recently in Washington is if you drive out from the Capitol to College Park in Maryland, along any of those access roads, you see this, looks good on paper, urban revitalization of enhanced squares and beautifully polished, restored brick little shops and some residential development kind of placed in. And there's one, and then 4 or 5 miles later, there's another one of these pockets, revitalized pockets. And there's nobody there. The storefronts are empty. There's nobody really around. And so you see some physical manifestation of somebody saying, okay, we need to make an investment in this place. But yet, the true manifestation of people actually being a part of that place and using that place and being of that place doesn't seem to be readily apparent. And I think perhaps this ties to some of what Minnie was saying earlier as well about, okay, we've got a policy that's creating this, but where does the policy come from? How did it connect with those neighborhoods? Is that what that neighborhood needed?
But there are multiple roles here, because one of the big problems with those kind of places, one of them is Hyattsville, where there's a new Busboys and Poets, and if you've been to D.C., Busboys and Poets, right. One of the smartest people in the world, Tony Shalal, who started those, except for that one, all of his have been in places where there was public transportation. That's where New York has it over so many other places. I came here on public transportation because I knew I could get here in seconds. If I was leaving from D.C., I would have thought of taking a cab because maybe the train wasn't running, the elevator wasn't running, the escalator wasn't running, something might have broken down. Not to mention that...
You can't eat on the train.
You can't eat, a guy with full armor. Ma'am, there's a fine of $50 for each of those things you're holding. So, but public transportation, which starts at the federal level, those transportation dollars start at the federal level. Those are key, and the D.C. metro area does not have a robust public transportation system. Its buses are horrible, and its subways don't go enough places. And
when are you coming back?
I know. Maybe I'll build a subway there, and then I'll be back.
Well,
after we build our museum at the Smithsonian, I'll be back.
Now that we're reminded that you can starve on the Washington, D.C. Metro,
that's true.
I want to thank Kinshasa and Mindy and Mary for a fabulous conversation, one that could have continued for 4 or 5 days. There's an awful lot to mine in these survey results. I do hope you'll all take a look at it. We'll be turning over the survey in other discussions at the summit and in other panel discussions. There's so much on here that I didn't get to, but we are out of time, and I need to call it a wrap. Thank you very much.
Thank you.